Speaking up doesn't always mean that you're the loudest person or the person with all the answers.
You're always wanting to think about, what does your audience care about? I always go into every single meeting, what value can I bring to this person and how can I make that person's life easier?
You don't really have to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I'm not really sure, let me get back to you, or let me look that up.
When you're in a room with people that have amazing communication skills, it's like this beautiful dance.
Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Jess. I'm the host and creator of the Art of Speaking Up podcast, and I'm also a career coach for professional women. And as you can probably tell by the sound bites in the beginning of this episode, today's episode is an interview episode, which I haven't done in ages and which makes me so excited. If you are craving a conversation that is deep and very truthful and also very inspirational, you are going to love today's episode. Today, I am chatting with two alums of my group program, the Art of Speaking Up Academy. If you've been listening for a while, you probably know what the Art of Speaking Up Academy is. If this is your first time hearing about it, it is my group program where I support my clients in building confidence and developing a verbal communication style that is powerful and crisp and really helps them show up as a thought leader at work. And I was listing out everything that we covered in today's episode because I always do that before I record an intro. And the list got so long. So let me give you a sneak peek of everything we cover in this conversation because I think it is going to make you feel very excited and pumped up to dive in. So here are some of the big themes you're going to hear us unpack. Confidence, the pressure to have all the answers, over-preparing and how that relates to our levels of confidence, communicating effectively without having to script everything that you say, the pressure to sound perfect when you speak, how to navigate self-criticism and the experience of nitpicking yourself and the way that you're communicating. We also talk about how to demonstrate leadership through the way that you show up in meetings and share some tips and tricks to help you feel more confident and communicate more effectively at work. Now, the reason that this interview generated such a long, rich, robust list of topics, and that list isn't even comprehensive, is because of my two guests, Vicky and Ashley, and how much wisdom they shared with me and us all in this interview. So I'm going to introduce each of them and share their bio, and then we're going to dive straight into the conversation. So you're going to hear from Ashley. Ashley Evenson is a marketing and digital media expert with nearly 20 years of experience. She's the founder of AE Marketing Collective and Coalition, where she provides fractional leadership and strategic marketing services. Her background includes leadership roles at a big three consulting firm and top ad agencies specializing in growth strategy, demand generation, and digital marketing. And she is passionate about integrating AI to drive business innovation. And you're also going to hear from Vicky. Vicky Zhu is a senior software engineer and an ERG leader who is passionate about driving change both in code and in the community. So we're going to cut straight into the interview. The first voice you're going to hear is Vicky's, and then you will get to meet Ashley. I am so excited for this conversation. So let's dive in and listen together. Thank you both for being here. I'm really excited to jump into the conversation. So we're going to start by talking about confidence, and we'll hear from you, Vicky, first. Can you talk through how your definition of confidence has evolved?
I think before, to me, confidence and also leadership meant someone who knew everything, had all the answers, has formed opinions about everything, and is just has very good conviction on pretty much everything that they're supposed to be the matter expert on. since being in the academy and just over the past few months, I'm starting to realize that you don't really have to have all the answers. It's okay to say, I'm not really sure. Let me get back to you, or let me look that up. And I think I've started noticing that there are leaders that I'd admire who do that. And I've just never really noticed that, or maybe they're just very confident in the way that they say they don't know. And so I think the biggest takeaway has been just, you don't have to know everything. You're just committed to figuring out what it is with the rest of your team.
I love that. I see so often that people feel pressure and stress at the idea that they have to have all the answers. What would you say to someone who's thinking like, okay, I want to believe that's true, but don't I look bad? Like, doesn't it not look good if I don't have the answer?
I think it really helped for me to see other leaders actively say that they didn't know. And I would suggest maybe paying closer attention to that, not to nitpick other people and be like, aha, look at that. Like, you also didn't know the answer, but just to notice that other people will definitely not always say, yes, I know exactly what that is. I am always right. This is the correct way to go. And just start kind of looking at how other people answer questions, how they say they don't know things. And I think that's really helped me, is just to see other people be messy and realize that not everyone is just so clean and perfect all the time.
Yeah, 100%. When we start to notice other people's behaviors, that's when we see our own dissonance. Because if it's okay for them to say something, right, then we start to realize like, well, why isn't it okay for me to answer a question in a similar way? So I love that perspective, and curious your thoughts on this one, Ashley.
Yeah, I'd like to build on it. I think definitely the point that Vicky made, that picking up on what leaders are doing, once you start that, you start to see the techniques that you've learned through the art of speaking up and it coming through these leaders. I think one of the things that I saw leaders doing that, I learned in the art of speaking up was, playing things back to team members. I was like, oh, they know that technique too. Or putting some framing around, questions just to gather their thoughts. So once you go through this course, you start really picking up and what other leaders are doing. You're like, oh, I see what they're doing now. And it's almost kind of funny to see that come to fruition.
Yeah. And I think it can help you to feel more confident because you start to see that there are other ways to demonstrate competence and leadership besides always having the answer or the information. It could be in like how you're interacting, how you're mirroring back what people are saying, how you're presenting information and things like that. So it just gives you more options. So I love that. So the second thing I want to talk about, and this is getting more into your personal experience, Vicky, but I would love to get a sense of how your confidence has grown. And if you have, people love stories and like specific examples. So I'm curious if you've had any moments recently where you're like, oh, wow, like old me maybe would have handled that differently.
Yeah, I think the theme of me in Art of Speaking Up Academy has been to embrace messiness. And I definitely started with environments and people who are more comfortable to me. So my immediate team, people I work with more often, and people that I already have that trust with, and just not showing up to a meeting completely prepared or not writing a script for what I'm going to say, and just practicing sitting in the mess and being uncomfortable, which is very uncomfortable. But I think when you start practicing with people that you trust, people that you already have that relationship with, it's a lot easier to get past that discomfort. And then the more you do it, the more you're just used to it. And then you can maybe take a baby step to some people who might not be as familiar to you, or if there's a meeting with mostly people who are familiar to you, but there's one or two people that you haven't really spoken to, that's really helpful. Practicing with friends too. It doesn't have to be in a work environment. You can practice with your friends of just showing up completely unprepared. I'm one of those people that likes to plan out my entire day, and this is my calendar and this is what we're going to do on this trip. And just kind of showing up to a trip and saying, you know what, I got nothing. Let's see where this takes us. makes me really uncomfortable. But because I'm with people that I'm already familiar with, because I'm with friends, it's a lot easier to get past that discomfort. And once you get past it, you start realizing that it doesn't really matter as much.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Do you notice a different presence or a different sort of dynamic that happens in the meeting or conversation when you're going in more messy and less prepared?
It's definitely more freeform. I feel like I can be more open about things versus if I've prepared, say, a script of this is what I'm going to say. This is the flow chart of if this person answers this, this is how I'm going to respond. There's less creativity in that. And it's less of a conversation. And you definitely get tripped up more often. That's, I think, the con of doing it that way is if things go a different direction of, I didn't put this on my flow chart. What do I do? There's a big uh-oh moment and then you kind of freeze. But if you don't come in with a set plan, sometimes things can go a way that you didn't expect. And that initial reaction is still kind of the same of freezing up and thinking, oh God, I don't know what to do. But I do think it is a little bit less because you don't have it already planned out. So you can kind of open up and really think about it versus, oh no, this isn't going exactly how I planned it. Now I'm panicking because I definitely just reviewed everything this way and now I don't know what to do versus, I didn't really have a plan going into this, but let me think about that and see what I can figure out.
Yeah, it takes courage to go into something without trying to plan every single contingency of how it can turn out. And it can feel scary, but I do think if we overplan, it prevents us from being present. And it prevents us then from answering anything that comes up as a surprise. And I also think it can keep us small in a way because we feel like we can't answer the surprise question, even though we actually can. And so I wonder for you if going in unprepared is also just a way to test out the hypothesis that oh, maybe I can respond to the unexpected things that get thrown at me.
Yeah, for sure. I think there is definitely a small confidence boost when you go in unprepared and a question comes at you and you're like, oh, I know the answer to that. Let me just say that. So yeah, the pro part of that is sometimes you go in and you didn't anticipate something and it goes in the direction that's really amazing that you maybe didn't plan for or didn't think it would go in that direction.
Yeah, 100%. And just to clarify for everyone, we're not saying never prepare for any meeting. I think preparation is this tricky double-edged sword where it is appropriate in certain contexts and certain amounts. And then there are situations where it's actually counterproductive. And I think it does require confidence to move away from preparation in situations where it's not actually helping you feel more powerful and show up more effectively in the conversation.
Yeah, I think it's also just a skill to figure out how much preparation you need. I was and still kind of am a over preparer. I like to figure out the contingency plans and the what ifs of all the scenarios, but obviously nobody can actually prepare for all the possibilities. And that I think does set you back if you're just sitting there spinning your wheels trying to figure out, well, if this goes wrong or if that goes wrong, how do I figure this out? And a lot of times I think that kept me from speaking up and that kept me from actually doing anything in those meetings of just, oh, I didn't prepare for that. I can't say anything.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to say anything at all. And so, yeah, definitely do prepare, but it is a skill, I think, to figure out how much to prepare.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it's a mindset thing and it's not necessarily about preparing more, but it's just about learning to trust that you can handle what comes up.
Yeah. And just to build on that, recently when I think about preparing, I think there's a difference between really knowing your materials and then preparing your whole talk track. And historically, that's something that I would do. I know all my materials, know all my talk track. And I feel like as long as I know my materials very solidly, and now that I understand the tips and the tricks on how to frame and set expectations, I don't need to prepare my whole talk track. I just need to know my material. So I think there's a difference too, is my over preparing before was all the talk track, all the points. Now it's just like, I feel confident in how I'm going to show up and present myself as long as I know my slide deck inside out.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people struggle with, which is like, I feel like I need to script it because I'm scared that I will like draw a blank or get frozen. Is that something that you were experiencing when you were more doing like the scripting?
I think, well, when I came to the realization I didn't need to script anymore, is essentially I went off script regardless. And I felt like if I was on script, I was almost not robotic, but I showed up differently. I showed up as a character and not myself. Even preparing for this podcast, I wanted to like write out all my script and talking points. And I was like, nope, you don't need to do that. You show up as yourself. Here, I have a screen up right now of some of the talking points that I want to make sure to cover, but that's about it.
Oh, that's so powerful. Do you feel like there's a part of you that's scared and is like, oh no, but like, I do want to have the script all written out. Like, what does that feel like for you to be like, no, I'm not going to script it out. I'm just going to show up?
Yeah, I think in general, I'm a nervous Nelly type person. So I always want to over prepare. But yeah, I just have to remind myself, be confident in how I can speak and how I can show up. And I know it's going to be okay. So I think it's almost this like safety blanket that is no longer needed.
I love that. And I think a really big ingredient in all of this that we haven't talked about is like how much we are willing to have like a fumble or like have something happen that isn't perfect. And I think when we're in heavy resistance to that idea of like, I might have to restart my sentence or I might say it wrong or it might not come out perfect. I think that's when we really want the script. And I'd be curious to hear from either or both of you of like, do you feel like you're more okay with it not being like 100%, like every single word is perfect?
Yeah, I'm okay with that, especially too. What I noticed when I would have a script, I would, maybe this is not the proper saying, like would inflect different words or like go up or like almost put a question mark on things when I had a script. And it just became like, I don't think this is natural. This is not truly who Ashley is and who she should be showing up. So it needs to be more off the cuff. So that was kind of a realization I had.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to practicing with people that you trust more is when you fumble in front of them, it's a little lower stake. And then you start realizing, oh, nobody really cares if I pause for a minute and say, oh, sorry, can I start that again? I don't think I fully got what I wanted out of that. Or just, oh, give me 1 second. I need to think this through. Like you start realizing that most of it is kind of in your head, but the idea of making a fumble in front of anyone still gives me a lot of anxiety just thinking about it. So I think it is just a lot of practice makes perfect of the more you do it, the more you realize most of it is in your head and nobody's sitting there being like, aha, look at you. I just caught you in a big mistake.
I like the aha. It's like they're waiting in the bushes for something to go wrong. Yeah, it's so true. I just think fumbles are inevitable. Like for me, the goal is never for it to sound perfect. And I think ironically, we sound better when we're in that headspace. Like it's fine if it's not perfect versus when we're like, everything needs to be great. That's when we feel anxious and stressed and it ends up being counterproductive. So okay, we'll pivot to talking about self-criticism, which is something that I really love exploring because I think it's such a universal experience, but it's one that even though it's so universal, I think we can feel really alone in it. And I think as we better understand our relationship with self-criticism, it tends to really impact our process of building a sense of internal confidence and security within ourselves. So we'll start with you on this, Vicky. I would just love to hear your overall thoughts on the relationship between self-confidence and self-criticism.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm really big on propping other people up. I'm really big about mentoring and sponsoring other people. And so when I'm speaking to other people, generally I'll tell them all these things about like, oh, you did really great. I didn't even hear that you fumbled over that and stuff like that. But when it's me, I tell myself a completely different story. When I'm talking to other people, it's more, oh, I really liked what you did here. and it's a lot more positive. And then when I'm talking to me, I start nitpicking about maybe it was 90% perfect. And then that 10% is what I end up focusing on. And I start kind of spiraling on, oh, but that one word that you said, that wasn't very good. Or I don't think you were clear in that one sentence that you had said. It's just learning to speak to myself the way that I would speak to someone that I care about has made a big difference of just taking a step back and saying, well, okay, let's pretend that it wasn't Vicky that just went through this presentation. Let's pretend that it's Vicky's best friend. How would you see this presentation? And what would you say to her? And I would never just say to her like, oh, wow, that was a big failure. Like, you did such a poor job. Maybe there's stuff where it's like, oh, you could have done a little bit better here, but it definitely wouldn't be the same tone or the same way I would speak to her. Then sometimes I would give myself feedback.
Yeah. Curious your thoughts on that, Ashley.
Yeah. I mean, I think an aha moment during the course was like self-criticism is not necessarily yourself. It was based on something else in the history. And that was like such an aha moment, like, oh, that is actually not my truth. It was something that was said or an event that had happened in the past, whether that, was last year, 5 years, early in your career, or even just elementary or high school. It's this like compounding effect of how your self-criticism is that foundation starts. So I think just realizing like, oh, it's actually not me. It's all these like different voices throughout, 38 years old at the time of what that was developed. So that was a big key unlock for me. I think on a confidence standpoint, I definitely have had highs and lows of my confidence throughout my career. That can change, on a yearly standpoint or even on different types of clients. So I think it's just different experiences, different environments. Your self-criticism and confidence can go up. And I think that's okay, but just now realizing maybe the root of that self-criticism and then how to overcome those in those different moments of the fluctuation.
100%. Yeah. And I think being aware of and normalizing the fluctuations is so important because we are human. We are not robots. We are not going to feel the same all of the time. And our context and environment is not going to be the same all the time. So you combine those two things, and that means we're going to fluctuate and ebb and flow through different states of self-confidence and different states of, levels of self-criticism. And I think where we really can get stuck is if we expect that we should feel perfect and amazing all of the time and that there should be no fluctuation. Yeah, I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think something that helped me was the idea of what commitment to leadership means and how it doesn't mean that you're the one that has all of the answers and you're the one making all the decisions, but more just you're the one that is moving things forward towards whatever goal that you have. And that could be that maybe you do have all the answers, but it could also be you're trying to figure out who has the answers or trying to figure out even what the problem really is to solve. And so making it a little bit less personal has helped because before, if I felt like I didn't have all of the information and the research to back up what I was going to say, I'm just not going to say it because there's just a risk of someone saying, oh, no, I think that's all wrong. And I would feel very embarrassed or I would just beat myself up for it. But now with the mindset of commitment to leadership and commitment to we're trying to move towards this goal to solve this problem, what I'm bringing up is just a possible solution to the problem. And if it happens that there are better solutions or I'm not fully understanding what the problem is and this won't quite work, that's okay because I'm just bringing it up to kind of give people an idea and we can iterate over it. We can scrap it all together, but it's not personal to me. It's not oh, Vicky, A+ on bringing this and solving this problem. It's more, here's an idea. How do we feel about it? No, okay, let's try something else. Let's edit it a little bit to figure out how it best works. And I think thinking about it that way and framing it that way has really helped, and not to take things so personally of, this is my idea and suddenly nobody likes it. And that means nobody likes me as a person. And I think that's where a lot of my self-criticism and my self-confidence comes from, is I want everyone to like me. I want, everyone in the room to think positively of me and think that I'm an okay person. And taking that out of the meeting and out of the project and just saying, these are possibilities and this is the goal we're working towards. How do we get there? Is a lot easier than I'm putting myself out there and will everyone like what I say?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And one thing that I take away from that is that while it is normal to have ups and downs in our confidence and how we feel about ourselves, we can begin to discover which of those downs are maybe avoidable or could be softened a little bit if we can understand like where we're adding an extra layer of pressure. And for you, that extra layer of pressure is like, the idea has to be right. It has to be received in the perfect way. And if it's not, that means something about like me and who I am. And moving away from that gives you a sense of freedom in terms of like how you show up in a discussion, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, love that. What are your thoughts, Ashley?
Yeah, I think that it comes down to, I really like this. I know it's all over TikTok, but at least on my FYP, but emotional regulation. And once you kind of figure that and really detach yourself from this ego to the work and just focus on outcomes, it feels so freeing to know like, oh, this doesn't have to be on me. And I think the framing and expectations of, when I want additional feedback on some of the work, I say, hey, let's pressure test this together. Or, hey, I took pen to paper first on this first draft, but would love everyone else's feedback, insights. Please beat this up so we can make it the best outcome. So setting that expectations, one for me is like almost giving myself the okay that someone's going to probably tear this up, and that's okay. So I think that framing and expectations has really, really helped me to drive those outcomes.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Gosh, there's like so much to explore in this idea of like wanting approval for our suggestions and like the emotional impact of whether we get that approval or not and all the different things that it can mean. This came up a lot in various sessions last week. The idea also of like, just because a leader in the room says, no, I want it this way, that doesn't actually mean that they're correct. Right. And so I think like that's another really important part of this, is that we sometimes just assume that like, if they think it should be this way, I must be wrong. And that's another useful thing to start to realize. I think it goes back to the theme of putting people on a pedestal. A lot of these discussions are subjective. And when we can see that, that can really help us get out of like this right, wrong paradigm. And just curious if either of you relate to the right, wrong paradigm and maybe like finding more of a gray area and more flexibility in terms of like, just because someone above me disagrees doesn't mean like my idea wasn't good.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what I have found to be successful in those situations are just asking more and more questions. And you'd be quite surprised on the willingness for those individuals to actually open up and have a conversation. Just like, oh, interesting, tell me more. And why? Okay, here's what I'm thinking. Let's see if we can, again, beat this up together. Let's pressure test this together. But I have found asking more questions has been very, very helpful in those types of situations.
100%. And I think asking the questions requires confidence and resilience in the moment, because the new opinion that you're getting feels scary and threatening. So you have to find that strength within yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to now open up a conversation about this scary, threatening opinion that I just want to push away. But then I'm curious for you, like, how does it feel then when you do have the courage to be like, okay, let's talk more about this?
I mean, it feels great because, again, I now have had this huge mind shift towards outcomes. And I have some junior team members that I work with, and I saw them struggling with, I knew they had an opinion on something, and they very much were quiet in a meeting. And I was like, oh, I know that they have an opinion on this. So I ended up doing the pressure testing, just, being at a little bit of a higher level. So after the call, I did some coaching with them. I'm like, I'm giving you the power to pressure test this. I knew you guys were not agreeing with the angle on it, but this is a safe spot. And I definitely gave them the coaching, exactly what we've talked about here. Ask the why and just pressure test it. So I've now elevated them and given them the green light. Like, it's okay to pressure test. Don't agree. And I know you guys weren't agreeing to the solution that we were going towards. So it's almost full circle now of like, I'm picking up on those cues of the team agreeing, but I know that they weren't agreeing, but then giving them the space and the okay for them to do the pressure testing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to look good by agreeing and respecting the authority. But then that can lead to a situation where, leaders can become uncertain about what you're thinking, right? And then they don't know if you are bringing your own thought leadership into the room.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. One last question on self-criticism. What would you say from kind of like a friend to friend perspective to someone who is struggling with a lot of self-criticism?
I think definitely trying to figure out where it's coming from is really helpful. Who is actually the voice that is speaking to you? Is it actually like your boss, or is it from something in your past where maybe a teacher said something and you just totally shut down? And now every time you do a certain thing, like you picture your teacher there saying the same thing to you. Kind of trying to figure out where it's coming from, I think really helps. And also just taking a step back and giving yourself room to really reflect. I think a lot of self-criticism comes from a very initial snap judgment that comes immediately after something has happened and maybe is not fully taking into account the entire situation or all the other thoughts that are coming up. It's just the initial first thought. And so learning to take a step back, taking a moment, letting yourself just reflect on the entire thing, figuring out, oh, what is this voice actually saying? And does it actually mean anything? And just kind of giving yourself space, I think is really important. And more often than not, you take that 1 minute even of just pause, maybe that voice doesn't even show up anymore. And it's like, oh, I don't know where that came from. Like, that wasn't relevant.
That's so powerful because we just get sucked into it so quickly without even realizing that we have an option to slow down and not get so hooked in to that thought.
Yeah. And just to build on Vicky, I almost like identical to her response. So not a lot of building to be done. But I think too is you have to find that fire within yourself. And sometimes figuring out that who that self-criticism is, internally, if that is a different voice in your head, is let that be fuel to your fire and to overcome that. And I found that to be successful.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that feels so motivating, right? Like there's this part of me that's like trying to get in my way and tear me down and like, let me see what I can prove to myself and let me see if I can show myself that I have so much more to offer than I might be thinking that I do in this moment.
Right.
So powerful. Okay. We're going to talk about executive communication and executive presence. And we'll start with you on this one, Ashley. First, let's just do like an overview. I know you mentioned a couple tools and frameworks. When you think about the tools and frameworks that we learned for executive communication inside of the academy, what are like the one or two that have been most useful to you? And then we'll also get into like tips and tricks for people listening.
The absolutely framework that I love, and I love a good framework, is the Sell, Tell, and Tour guide. I literally use this every single day in my career. Like, you're always wanting to think about, what does your audience care about? What is that value? And then telling them, like, what are you going to tell them? Like, what are you trying to achieve? Is it to inform? Is it to make a decision? okay, what do I need that individual to do? And then tour guide, make it easy for that individual. You need it to be snackable. It needs to be digestible. I always go into every single meeting. What value can I bring to this person and how can I make that person's life easier? And that's the lens that I've almost added on to the framework. I've almost added that on this framework going to absolutely every single meeting. And it's been quite successful. And I think another framework, and we were getting into it a little bit a few minutes ago, is the disagreement map. I think that's a great framework as well. And just for the listeners here, this is where we were talking about always looking at outcomes and always asking those questions to really figure out what is best. So I found those two frameworks are extremely powerful, especially if you're in a role that has a lot of meetings with different teams and different individuals, really focusing on who you're meeting with, what value am I bringing to them, and how can I make their life easier?
Yes, there's a big theme emerging in our conversation, which is focus on results. What are we here to do? And allow your decisions to be guided by that. I would love to get tips and tricks from each of you. So if someone is listening and they have a meeting coming up, what is like one small thing that they can do or shift to make their communication stronger and more elevated for their audience?
Yeah, I think a really easy thing listeners can do that goes along with the same framework is before I have one-on-ones, I always send, whether that's on the Teams or Slacks, I send a quick, not an agenda, but also here's what's top of mind for me. And say, I want to discuss X, Y, and Z. I need to inform you on this. I need your decision. So not an agenda of like blank, 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 but like exactly very descriptive of what you want to do. So that's why I've seen to be very, very helpful. Also too, it helps ground myself when I'm speaking. Like when I walk into the office, hey, remember those 3 things I sent to you? Like I throw up 3 fingers to talk about that. In addition to, I found when I send the, quick Slack or Teams message, whomever I'm talking to would be like, oh, great, I'm aligned, or hey, actually, let's pivot a little bit. Something else came up. So it helps them understand what they need to bring to the table too, if there's something else, so you're not blindsided. And then it helps you really, really prioritize. And I just found like that to be so successful instead of just walking into your one-on-one without a clear, what's top of mind.
Yeah, super useful. How about you, Vicky?
I love that. I think something else that's really helped me is to just build in pauses and kind of maybe even force yourself to take a little pause before answering or just a small reflection. Because once you get into that meeting, it's going to feel like, oh, boom, boom, boom. We have to move really, really fast. And then you might get disoriented or it might feel overwhelming. And just taking that small pause and building it into, if you're a scripter, just building it into the script and just saying, okay, this is where I'm going to take a pause. And it can be for just a few seconds, just to kind of recompose yourself and do a little bit of reflecting. I think that really helps just take your mind off of, we're moving so fast. I don't know what's going on. I must not be very good at this, or like, oh, this isn't going according to plan, and just take you out of that anxiety.
Oh my gosh, yes. Pauses. I love pauses. When you said pauses, I was like, yes, like I like to be a pause queen. I think they're just very useful and valuable, and they help slow down our mind. And I think when our mind is moving very fast, it is often working against us. And it's a very normal thing that happens, but the pause is such a great way to counteract that. Yeah. Okay. Before we shift into the closing questions, is there anything that I have not asked you about, or just anything on your mind that you want to share?
I think going back to just the taking a look at how leaders maybe embrace the messiness or mess up in some way or admit they don't know, that's kind of helped me a little bit, because I have a few mentors or leaders that I look up to, and the fact that they can say that they don't know is just something that I super admire about them. And it's something that I'm like, oh, wow, this person feels comfortable enough admitting that they don't know. And so sometimes I kind of build that into the way I answer things to more junior developers of, oh, I want to be more like this mentor that I have that has been able to admit to me that she doesn't know. Then maybe I'm also giving this junior developer the same feeling. And so that kind of, I think, takes some of the pressure off of, I need to know everything. I need to be answering all the questions for them. And also, I think helps, hopefully, the junior developer also get that same mindset of, oh, she's not perfect either. Like nobody in the senior or leadership is perfect. And maybe that'll help them a little bit too. So the idea of, I guess, acting like how you would want people to act towards you is actually really helpful to me sometimes when I'm feeling like, oh, I have to be perfect, and just embracing that and saying, oh no, I really like it when leaders aren't perfect. So maybe I should embrace that and be less perfect for other people as well.
I love that. So first of all, that helps with the dissonance, right? It's like, if I like being this type of leader for my team, then I also have to acknowledge that like, it's not critical that I always have the answer. And I think it does require confidence to be able to have like the humility with our teams to just totally be open, because I think sometimes it can be tempting to be like, well, this is the one place where I'm the most senior person in the room, and this is the place where I can more easily feel confident. And so now I really want to be perfect and like embody that perfectionist version of myself that I'm trying to be, versus like, nope, like that's just not my goal anymore. I want to be the leader that I admire and like that I enjoy being around. And yeah, I just love that.
Yeah. And I think just to build on that for my thoughts, I feel like this is almost should be a homework assignment for the listeners, for them to really absorb and observe their leadership team. Like, I would love for anyone listening, start to pick up on to see if your leaders say, hey, can I play this back to you? Let me reframe this. Tell me more. Because those are all the techniques that is giving them a second to think about something. It's having you explain more where they may not know the answer. So I think what I want to, leave with is like, let this be a homework assignment for anyone listening and see if you can pick up on it, because I think that's going to expose in a good way that, leaders aren't perfect, but they have found techniques to make them look great. But those are just the few things that you may pick up on.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. It's funny. I gave that as a homework assignment very recently. I was like, I need you to find people doing things wrong, like people above you doing things wrong and incorrectly and having really bad ideas so that you could see that they're not perfect, that no one is perfect.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Awesome. Okay. So we will do the closing questions. These are my favorite. Let's start with you, Ashley. The first question is on the name of the podcast, which is The Art of Speaking Up. What does that phrase mean to you?
I mean, I was telling this to someone recently. I think it was to listen to your podcast because, you know me, I'm a fangirl. And I was like, communication is really an art form. And that's what it means to me. And, before I was like, oh yeah, I can write a great, concise email, but you really don't understand how important like precise communication, verbally and written as well, and just how it's art form. And when you're in a room with people that have amazing communication skills, it's like this beautiful dance. And it's actually really great to watch. Like, for example, I saw leaders say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but what if we think of it this way? It's just this, it's a true art form. It's this dance. So when you see effective communicators, it is really the most beautiful thing. And I have a digital notebook, and I have a whole folder dedicated to sayings I've heard, like of leaders. It's just almost memorizing in a way. But that's what really the art of speaking up to me is, learning that communication is really an art form.
Love that. How about you, Vicky?
I love that. I might have to pick up on recording some sayings in a notebook myself. I think for me, it's learning that speaking up doesn't always mean that you're the loudest person or the person with all the answers. I think speaking up also in some ways means listening and trying to get an idea of what people are saying in the room. And I used to think, oh, I can't be a leader because I'm not a naturally loud person. I am definitely more of a reflector. I like to take time to mull things in my head before saying anything. And so I always told myself, like that's not what a leader is. Leaders immediately have something to say, and it's always the right thing to say. And just learning that taking a step back and listening and thinking things over before you answer actually is kind of speaking up. It is a good way of processing information, and you don't have to be the first person to answer all the questions. You can take the time to let me think about that. Let me get back to you. Hey, do you mind if, I take some time on this? And that does not mean that you're not speaking up.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I think people can feel the energy behind it. Like when you say let me take some time to think about this, people can feel if you're saying that and you're going to figure it out, right? And you have confidence in your decision to look at it more closely and take it outside of that particular conversation. And so, yeah, just that reminder for everyone that the energy is a lot of what people are responding to. I don't think people ever come out of a room being oh, she was so great. She had every single answer to every single question, right? It's oh, she was so great. I feel I can trust her, right? She has this, she's got this. And I don't think we need answers all of the time to give people that confidence in us. So yeah, love both of those answers. Before we do the final question, do either of you want to share where people can learn more about you or where people can reach out if they want to? And then whatever you share, we'll also make sure to put in the show notes so that people can find that easily.
Sure. So my name is Ashley Evenson, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I should show up. Also, too, I own 2 companies, AE Marketing Collective and Coalition. So you can definitely Google both those companies and find me as well.
Amazing. And we'll drop that in the show notes. How about you, Vicky?
Yeah, you can actually find everything at vickyzhu.com. So I have linked pretty much LinkedIn, GitHub, all of that where you can contact me.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. And I'll put all of that in the show notes, and we'll do the final question, which is my favorite. So the context for this final question is that I started this show because I went through a very difficult period in my corporate career where I was really struggling to believe that I had the capabilities necessary to create the career path that I wanted. And I wanted to create a podcast that would be a source of inspiration for anyone who was questioning themselves or doubting themselves or just looking to feel more empowered and inspired. So with that in mind, I wanted to give the spotlight to you to share whatever you would want to share to someone who similarly might be looking to feel lifted up and inspired as they're signing off from this episode.
So I'm going to start with a quote and give a little context. So I like to quote the great Taylor Swift here. I'm sorry, the old Ashley can't come on the phone right now. Why? Oh, because she's dead. And what I mean by that is, I was so hung up on being a people pleaser for a long time and having, I think, Jessica, this is from you, is good girl syndrome. And I have completely dropped that. So that is my motto right now.
Oh, I love that. I love that we brought Taylor Swift in. She made an appearance.
She did.
How about you, Vicky?
Yeah, I think just learning to love messiness, learning to feel comfortable sitting in the mess and not having to become anxious thinking about it, and just working little by little of just take a step in, stand in it for a second, and then maybe take a step out. And eventually, I think it'll get a lot easier, but just working on a little bit of messiness at a time, because everything is going to be messy. Nothing is perfect, even if we all wish it was perfect. And so learning to just embrace the mess and being able to just be in it is going to be a really helpful skill.
Oh, I love that. I so agree with that. And thank you both for coming on and generously lending your stories and perspective.
Great. It was so great to be on this today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this interview. I loved having the conversation. I loved listening back to the conversation. I hope that it helped you feel seen and inspired you to stretch yourself and believe that expanding your confidence and learning to be a bigger, more confident presence in the room at work is totally 100% possible for you. One of my absolute favorite themes from this entire conversation that I feel like we just hit on over and over is this idea that a lot of times when we are trying to build confidence, we feel like we have to do all of these things that feel really pressury and bad. So we put pressure on ourselves to be and sound perfect, to always have all of the answers right away. We try to script what we're saying because we think that that's the best way for us to show up. We feel like we can't show up as ourselves. And what is so beautiful about this conversation is that it's such a reminder that so many of the things that help us feel confident are also things that feel really, really good to us. Allowing ourselves to be imperfect and human and a little bit messy, releasing the pressure we put on ourselves, getting out of patterns of over-preparing, stopping to think that we need to have all the answers, moving away from over-planning and scripting everything we say. All of these things help us feel better and they help us feel more confident. So it is such a win-win because I am all about women building confidence in a way that's authentic and sustainable. I know in my corporate career, I definitely experienced a lot of pressure to show up in a way that didn't feel good to me. And it wasn't until I found ways to show up that felt authentic and good to me that I actually started to feel comfortable and confident taking up space. I think that is such a beautiful message. And I am so thankful to Vicky and Ashley for being so open and courageous to come on the show and share their wisdom with you all. I'm going to link both of their information in the show notes. And if something that they said really touched you, please reach out and let them know. I know it would mean so much to them, and it would also mean so much to me. And lastly, if you want to join me inside the Art of Speaking Up Academy, and you want to do that deeper inner work to grow a sustainable, authentic sense of self-confidence, and to learn how to be a strong, confident, powerful voice in the room, even in rooms that feel intimidating, and even in rooms where you're surrounded by leaders and executives. That is the work that we do, and I would love to have you join us. I encourage you to add yourself to the waitlist by clicking the link in the show notes. I'm going to be opening enrollment for the Academy sometime around late September, early October. But if you're on the wait list, you don't have to worry because you will be the first to find out when doors open. That's jessguzikcoaching.com/academy. You will find the link in the show notes. And one last thanks to Vicky and Ashley. I had so much fun bringing you both on the podcast. This was such a special conversation. And thank you, the listener, for staying with us till the end. I will catch you in the next episode and have an amazing rest of your day. Bye.